Hello, everybody. Anyone that's still finding their ways to a seat, please come in and join us. You may have noticed we just played like a little countdown there, and that's because we're also streaming this event. And we're streaming it on YouTube, on Twitter, and on Twitch. So just in case you can't make one of our events, we do try and stream them if possible. We'll also put the recording on YouTube later. Hopefully, someone who is viewing, I see we have 3 viewers, so maybe one of those 3 people could let me know if everything is going okay with the audio in the comments, because I don't have a second person to check it. But touch wood, everything's going correct, and the people that are watching from home can also hear all of this. What they can't see is that this is a wonderful room full of people who braved all of the rubbish weather that we're having today, after a glorious day yesterday, to actually join us here in the Ecosia office. So round of applause to all of you for coming out in this really terrible weather. And we are going to have a great evening. We've got lots of things lined up. Probably what folks can't see is the slides, I'm realizing. So let me just also present those. Okay. And essentially what we have this evening is, this agenda actually, sorry, is slightly out of date, but I will tell you the update. So we have a talk evening. We have some of our PyLadies community members presenting their awesome knowledge and wisdom with you this evening. The first talk we're going to have is from Enos, and it's about the future of NLP, natural language processing in Python. And then we've got a talk from Noah about what is the contributor experience and how you can lead it. So 2 awesome talks. And then after those talks, we will also have some time for socializing, networking for the people here. We will finish the stream, so people who are watching from home can order their own food for then, do their own networking, or just chill. And we will have some food here for everybody that's come to attend in person. So first of all, we're going to start with a few community announcements and a few pointers for the people in the room. So if you need the bathroom at any point, it's through the doors here, and then through to the back of that room, round the corner, you will see we have a couple of different bathrooms there. If you need anything to drink, please help yourself out of the black fridge in the kitchen. There's some glasses on the side. There's also a couple of snacks there if you're already peckish. We are in the offices of Ecosia, who is sponsoring our event. We're very grateful to them. Ecosia is a search engine, but they put all their profits into a better planet. If you're interested to know more about Ecosia, you can ask either myself, because I actually work here as a developer, or you can ask my colleague Vanessa over here, who is also really kindly supporting us with the event this evening. So thank you, Vanessa. So this is a little bit of a, what do they call it, slide karaoke for me, because I actually was not supposed to present the slides this evening. Fan was supposed to present them, but unfortunately she's delayed because of traffic. So she will come a little later, and she's done an amazing job organizing this meetup. And it's very sad that she can't be here right now to present that. But she'll be here later, so we can give her our gratitude then. I'm going to try and share the correct slides on the screen, on the stream, because someone's telling me they're the wrong ones. So thank you for that, and thanks for bearing with me. That's also the wrong ones. Let me just see if I can share the second screen. No. Sorry, folks, 1 second. Okay, here is the correct slide. So apologies to the folks who are watching remotely. And let's now see if my setup really works. Yes, okay, there we go. Berlin PyLadies. So who's attending a PyLadies Berlin meetup for the first time? Wow! Well, welcome. That's amazing. So great that you even more so came out not knowing fully what you were going to have to deal with this evening. So congrats to you all. You can find us on numerous places. We have various social media accounts. They're listed along the bottom, but the best place to find us, I would say, is on Slack. PyLadies is a global community. We're all around the world. It's an international mentorship group. We're focused on marginalized genders, such as but not limited to non-binary people, trans people, and women in tech. Our focus is on helping our communities become more active participants and leaders in the Python open source community. So this is our main value. All skill sets are welcome, but we also kind of welcome anybody to join and be included in our events. Our mission is to promote, educate, and to advance a diverse Python community, and we're doing this through outreach, education, conferences, events, and social gatherings like this evening. We are also trying to provide a friendly network. So we want to really bridge this with the larger Python world, and we don't think we can do that in isolation. So again, anyone with an interest in Python is encouraged to participate and be involved in this community. This is a repeat of that slide. Okay, and these are all the different chapters from around the world. They all have different awesome logos. So I think you can find them all on the PyLadies.com website. If you're attending our event, that means that you already agreed to abide by our code of conduct. I'm going to read this out because code of conduct is really important. It's a very important part of our community to ensure that we have a safe space for everybody to attend. So we believe that knowledge is for all, and at the same time, our events aim primarily to empower gender minorities in the tech community. By attending one of our events, online or in real life, you also agree to this code of conduct. PyLadies is dedicated to providing a respectful, harassment-free community for everyone, and we do not tolerate harassment or bullying of any community member in any form on any platform. So if you want to check that out, here's the information. If you feel like you observe or participate or receive any kind of violation, then you can reach out to us on our email at berlin@pyladies.com, and it will be taken seriously. So, what does the Berlin chapter do? What can you expect from this group, especially since a lot of you are attending for the first time? So we're trying to do regular monthly meetups with talks and workshops. Of course, we just went through 2.5 years of pandemic, so monthly was maybe a little ambitious, but still we're trying to do lots of regular stuff. We also try now and then to do full-day workshops. We try to do some setup events because we know that getting started with Python means getting it working on your machine, and this can be a big barrier for folks. And we try to connect people with companies because most of us are doing this because we also want to get some money, or we need to find income to pay our bills. So we try to connect with companies. We have lots of companies that are supporting us who are also looking to hire Python developers. So it's a great fit. And anything we can make, we can dream and we can make happen, or anything you can dream and we can try and make happen. So if you have ideas beyond this setup, please reach out to us with them. And with that, I will do the call for action to get involved, because these things don't happen kind of by themselves, and it takes a lot of input from different folks, and you can help in any different way that you want, maybe a way that isn't even listed here or that we've not even thought of. So like giving a talk or a workshop like Ines and Noah are doing today is awesome. You can help organize a meetup. That could be standing and welcoming people, that can be doing tweets, that can lean into whatever is the thing that you enjoy or what you feel talented at. I'm sure our community can benefit from that. You can be a coach at one of our workshops, and you can join the organizing team, which could look a bit more detailed of like answering emails, looking for sponsorship, connecting people to companies and so forth. So as I mentioned, Slack is really the best place to get started with all of this. It's very easy. You can sign up by going to the slackin.pyladies.com. It's on the meetup page. You accept the invite, and then you join City Berlin. Done. 3 steps. If you want to use your favorite search engine, which in my case, of course, is Ecosia, here's the shameless plug. You can also search it, and it will be one of the first ones that comes up in the results, I hope. Otherwise, I'm doing a bad job. So what's coming up? Well, October 20th, that's this Thursday. We're going to have an in-person hack evening for open source. It's Hack October, so if you're not familiar with Hack October, during the month of October, there's this celebration around open source, and everyone's encouraged to work on open source projects, and you can normally win a t-shirt or plant a tree if you manage to make 5 contributions. If you go along on Thursday, you can ask for support, you can meet people from different projects who will help you get started with this. Even if you don't want to do it for Hack October, I think it's also worth attending just to get that knowledge on working on open source. It's a great way to build a portfolio, especially if you're job hunting. In November, we're going to have another members talk evening, and it will be hybrid. So that's something to look out for as well, and it will be advertised on Meetup. So this evening, we have 2 community members speaking, which is really exciting. First up, we're going to have Ines. Ines is a developer specializing in tools for AI and natural language technology. She's the co-founder of Explosion, which I love Explosion, and a co-developer of Spacey, a popular open source library for natural language processing in Python and Prodigy. I didn't know that. That's very interesting. A modern annotation tool for creating training data for machine learning models. So very cool. And after Ines has shared her knowledge with us, we're going to invite Noah to join us. Noah's been active in open source software for some years now. Helped our community a lot. She also co-founded PyLadies Berlin in 2016, volunteered in PyData Berlin 2017, founded Sat Our Day Berlin in 2018. Women in Machine Learning Data Science, which also has this really cute shortened version, which I can never quite get my head around visually, in 2019, and volunteered in Use R Toulouse in 2019, and was a speaker at PyCon DE and PyData Berlin 2019, and co-maintains the User R Knowledge Days and co-chaired PyCon DE and PyData Berlin 2022. Which was an amazing conference if you weren't there. Alongside this, because that's obviously not enough, she went from being a data scientist to the director of data science at respectable companies and later became freelance consultant. Noah has a BSc in physics, an MSc in economics and business science, and an MRES, I don't even know what that is, in economics. So rather talented person, I would say. So feeling very honoured. Aside from all of you lead, we'll also ask you maybe to give us some feedback because that's how we can get better. I always forget to update this link. It's completely out of date, so I will try and update on the Meetup page the correct link. If you can give 2 minutes later this week or after you leave today, it would be appreciated. It helps us improve and like kind of navigate what things you're actually interested in hearing more about. So we will now switch over on the computer so that we can have the presentation from Ines. That will take a couple of minutes. So folks at home, please be aware, we've not disappeared. We just have to reconfigure the setup here. And folks in the room, please stay seated, stay where you are, don't go anywhere. And thank you so much for joining us this evening. 2 and 1. Okay, folks, we're back on the stream, but also in the room. And I think we have everything set up there. I'll just move my stuff over here out of the way. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Really a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's really cool to be back. Oh, sorry.
I'm going to give you a big round of applause.
Okay. I mean, if you want, sorry for like dropping the gun. Anyway, no, it's really cool to be back doing an event in person, which feels almost kind of weird after 2 years of COVID. So yeah, also in the city we're based in. So this talk I'm giving today, it's based on the keynote I gave pre-COVID at PyCon Columbia, which was a lot of fun. But yeah, it's been a while, so it has a few, little updates. It's a lot about stuff we were working on at the time, which are now released. So I feel like I can give you kind of a new perspective on that. And I will be talking about natural language processing, but mostly I will be talking about Python. So even if you don't really have a background in machine learning or anything like that, I hope maybe still like a lot of interesting pieces of software we've built, ideas and solutions in there. So and especially all of this is based on stuff we've learned over the years, stuff we've been working on at Explosion, which is a company I co-founded with my co-founder Matt, who's currently getting a drink over there. So what are we doing? Some of you might know us from our open source library Spacey, which is a popular library for doing natural language processing in Python. It's always hard to kind of estimate who's using your software if you're doing open source, but we're guessing that we have at least over 100K, a few 100,000 users across different companies and industries. Spacey has been downloaded over 100 million times, so it's definitely in use a lot. There are a lot of people who use it, and of course that also puts a lot of responsibility onto us to build good software for these people. And Spacey was always designed to be industrial strength, as in used in production. There are a lot of tools and libraries that are more focused on research, which is obviously a very important part of the industry. But for us, Spacey really fills that niche of being fast, efficient, and the thing you ideally should be using if you're building production applications. And that's also really influenced the design and the decisions we've made about developer productivity and developer experience. And our first commercial product is Prodigy, which is an annotation tool for creating training data for machine learning models. And the idea is, hey, if you're a power user of machine learning, natural language processing, if you are building your own systems, you're almost always training your own models or trying to evaluate models. And so you always need data that basically tells you, hey, here's what I want my system to predict. And Prodigy is a tool that helps you create this data for your systems to train your models, to evaluate your models. And that's also been going very well. It helped us fund the company in the beginning and helped us stay independent. We have over 7,000 users across all kinds of different companies and industries, including, I think, 21 of the Fortune 100. And the idea of Prodigy is it's really designed as a developer tool. So you can spin it up locally, run it on your data, and it focuses on the most efficient way of annotating your data and focusing on what you really want the human feedback on. And that means you can create more data more efficiently, train more, try out more things, and it really follows this sort of old school software model of remember back in the days when you could buy Photoshop. That's cool, that fits into the open source space as well. You want to be running your own system, you want to be running your library on your local machine the way you run all your other open source software, and that's what Prodigy does. So that's what basically we've been working on. And we are a Python company. All we do is in Python. And often, people, there's a lot of discussion around why Python has become so popular in machine learning and data science, or whether it is the top language. I do think we can all say Python has, over the past couple of years, become the leading language for machine learning, NLP, data science, and related fields. And if you're looking at the stats, some of these are a bit outdated. I should probably swap them out before coming here. But even if you look at more modern versions of these charts, the trend kind of continues. You can see issues, questions submitted on Stack Overflow. We can submit the KD Nuggets poll. We can see a KD Nuggets poll about languages using in machine learning. And so what we can see is, hey, Python is definitely the #1 language. And why is it? Why is that? Python, in a way, Python was kind of lucky to be there in the right place at the right time, because Python supported C extensions, which meant you could write parts of your code in C and make it fast and efficient, which is actually what a lot of libraries you might be using in Python already do, and that's what enabled Python to go beyond being this language that's kind of nice to use, but maybe a bit too slow for certain things you want to do. And especially if you're doing stuff like machine learning or data science, you really want to be doing it in a dynamic language, and that has also enabled environments like IPython, Jupyter, where you can evaluate the different cells, try out things, build your programs that way, and that was actually very successful. And finally, that's a point I think is also very important and maybe often overlooked, which is Python is a general purpose language. Python is a language that used to be much more popular for, say, web development. I'm sure even before my time, before I got into Python, I'm sure if you went to a meetup like this, it would have been people working on web servers, Django, websites, and that's what Python was. There are lots of other fields as well that people might be using Python for. So here's I think that's from the JetBrains /Stack Overflow survey. What are you doing with Python? And here you see, hey, data analysis and machine learning are up there, but also web development, DevOps, scraping, education, network stuff. So there are a lot of areas that people use Python for, and that's actually, in the end, makes it better than any specialized AI language that's only used for AI, because people can pick it up, and people can branch out from other areas that we were developing in before, like web development. And I think especially for an area like machine learning, that's super important, because you're very rarely doing machine learning for the sake of machine learning. There's always something you want to find out, and there's always something you want to do. And here's kind of a typical idea of like, hey, you can have different people working in a company with different specializations. And yes, you could have someone who's really the AI person and the rest are just like other programmers. Or you can have people who are sort of interchangeable and all have the same skills. But especially in something like machine learning and NLP, having a complementary skill set is super important, because you want to bring a problem and then solve it with the technology. And that's where it's really, really helpful if you're coming in from a different area. And I think that's also why Python has been a language that people like, because that's the language they brought into the field when they started becoming more interested in what's possible with NLP. So that's also, I like to call this tree-shaped skills. People often, I think the official term for it is T-shaped skills, like a T-shirt or the letter T, where you have like one specialization and then two sort of smaller branches. I think the tree is kind of a nicer metaphor for it, because it's more likely you can grow branches, you can have lots of branches, they can overlap. So in a team, you can have lots of different trees, different people, and if you need a skill, you grow a new branch. And that's what we found very, very helpful in our team and how we put together the work we're doing. And again, you ship, that's the same goes, you ship your org chart. And so if your org chart has people with interesting backgrounds and things they want to find out, that's often better than having it siloing in your AI and machine learning expertise. So NLP, I would say, again, maybe a couple of years ago, people were less interested in this field. There's been a lot that's happened, especially recently, and a lot of progress made that made the technology more useful. Also means that you can actually do stuff with it. So if you're looking at what's natural language processing, how did it work? How does it work? Typically, the way a lot of tasks were solved, the way we're also doing things in Spacey, if you've used that before, is you have some text that goes in, you want to analyze it, you want to find something out about it, and at the end of it, you want to get some structured representation that has like info that you need. So what you would do is you can have different types of models and different types of components that predict things. For example, you can predict how words are related in the sentence, like, yeah, what's the verb, what's the subject, what's the object, who does what. You can have word type, you can predict word types, for instance, like, hey, this is a verb, this is a proper noun. And you can predict things like, hey, what concepts are mentioned? Like, here we have a person, we have a company. Those are all things you can predict, and normally, you would do them in order and train a model that can do that. And hopefully, if you do it well, and if the data you're training it on is useful, you get something out at the end that can do this reasonably well on stuff it hasn't seen. So what's happened over the past couple of years, which you might have heard of, is stuff, something like BERT, GPT-3, transformers, large language models. That's been, especially recently, that's been talked a lot about in the mainstream, and even before, that was like one of the exciting things that happened. And the idea here is you can have a text and you can train a model, but you can finally solve one of the things that has always been quite difficult in NLP or a problem, which is we can't easily share knowledge. We want to be able to share some general ideas and basically things we know about the world between different things we're training. So even if we're training things for very different purposes, we want to be able to share sort of some essence that our model that we're training always has to know. And that's been difficult in the past, but we are able to solve this with a more general language model that we can reuse. We can train it on a lot of raw text, and in a nutshell, in a very simplified nutshell, the idea how a lot of these models work is we found out that if you train, if you show a model tons of raw text and you let it predict the next word given the previous words, what you get out of it at the end is actually very, very useful and holds a lot of really useful information about the language. And that, given that objective and lots of different variations of it, we can train this sort of binary artifact that's actually super, super useful and lets us then train more specific models more easily and more accurately, often with a lot less data. So that has been like incredibly useful and exciting for the field. There have been tons of iterations on it, lots of different kind of packages you can use, lots of different things you can do with it. But what it means is, in the end, it's often a component of your application. So you have this subnetwork that's like super accurate and that can give you a lot of shared knowledge about the language and the world. But you also want to be working with it a bit differently because you want to be training your task-specific model on top. You want to use it as a component of your application. So the question is, how can we? Well, one thing we had to ask ourselves when we were developing Spacey 3 is how can we provide a developer experience for NLP using Python on the Python level and make it easy for people to get started and build their own systems, while also make it extensible and easy for people who know what they're doing and really want to drill down into the tensor level of like one abstract vector that's doing a certain thing and that represents something about the language and the world. So that was one of the challenges, and they're different problems, and I will go through some of these problems in this talk or later on. But one is that this stuff is super abstract. Ultimately, if you are doing machine learning, what you're doing is you're passing all these arrays with like tons of dimensions through lots and lots of functions, and at the end you hope that something useful comes out in the end. So that makes code really difficult, really error-prone, really problematic. So following this, I have a little pop quiz, but it kind of depends on who here is at least somewhat familiar with NumPy and NumPy arrays. Yeah, oh, okay, that's great. Okay, cool, because then we can do it. And so I'll show you a function, and you have to shout and tell me how many dimensions the result has. If you can do it, this or guess. You have like this array, and you have to. Don't be shy. Anyone have any idea? I mean, I can just skip through it if it's anyway. So here we have 2 because we're indexing into that array. Anyway, it can get more complex. That's like common stuff you will see in your code. Also have 2 dimensions. Then stuff like this. That has 1 dimension because we're summing. Anyway, the point here is if you are if that's something you're familiar with, it might become second nature. But it's, you cannot immediately tell from the code, even if you say, hey, I've used NumPy before. I'm not like it's not obvious, and that's kind of a problem. But luckily, we can change these things and make them easier in Python by actually adding type annotations and type hints that are somewhat new, or at least for me as a library developer, I'm always like, oh, anything introduced in, I don't know, 3.6 feels still new because we had to support Python 2 for so long that it's like, now I'm like, well, finally I can use type hints. But anyway, type hints are not very new, but here, if you write a function like that, anyone can immediately see, hey, this takes an array of 3-dimensional floats, and what comes out should be an array of 1-dimensional floats. Even if you don't know what else is going on, you can tell what this thing should do, and that's really cool. And similarly, that's an example of a code function implemented in our machine learning library that covers spacey, and that here you have the type annotations, and by implementing these custom types for custom custom things that occur in your code base and for functions that you use, we can actually have static type checks that can tell us if something goes wrong or we write the bug. And in this case, if you use a modded enter, they can run static type checking. It can actually tell us, hey, because we're calling this method reshape3f, what comes out here can't be right, what you've annotated here, so there must be something wrong here, there must be a bug in your code. And that's really helpful, and that's the type of thing that could have easily taken you hours of debugging, or if not like days, weeks, like these NumPy expected dimension blah stuff. If you've ever come across that, it can be incredibly frustrating. You can spend a lot of time on that. So similarly, you can even MyPy the static type check that even lets you implement your own plugins. It's still a bit new, it's still all changing very fast, and I feel like that part of the ecosystem is still developing, but we're getting there, and it's really cool. We've played around with this a lot, so you can actually have you can implement a custom plugin that can tell you if things that are chained together, for example, are incompatible. And I think if we're looking at hey, what will make developers more productive and what will unblock people and make people get to the interesting stuff faster, I do think, for example, type checking and features like that in Python will be incredibly important, because that's what matters. That's one of the things that matters most. You have a developer, and if they're unproductive, that's really frustrating. Another problem is, if we're doing machine learning, there are a lot of moving parts, and they're all sort of connected, and they're all sort of important. We have the library we're using, like PyTorch, TensorFlow. We have the code we've implemented ourselves. We have some hyperparameters that we're tuning. We have the weights, the thing that comes out at the end, and we have a bunch of other settings. And whatever we're changing, everything ties together. If we're changing the model code, that will change the weights. If we're changing hyperparameters, that will also change the weights. We have to change the model code. Other settings can change completely everything. So it's this can easily become a mess. And that's also something we faced in our development process when we try to make spacey more powerful and support more complex models. And so one way we solve this, I'll go through this a bit more quickly, and I'll also have some links of how this works in practice. But we were hey, how about we could just put all the settings in a configuration file. And that's cool. You can log a bunch of stuff there, especially things that have to be consistent. The same hyperparameter has to be consistent in a lot of places. But that's cool. But we also don't want to be programming in the config. What if you want to do custom things, have custom logic? So the idea here is, hey, what we can actually do in Python is we can have a function registry that can assign names to functions. So we can have something in our configuration refer to a specific function and a specific version of it, and we can tell our config, hey, that's what we want to load. and we can pass in the arguments. And again, type hints here are really, really cool because we can check, does the stuff have the same type, and is the stuff valid that we're passing in. And then we can actually load this configuration file. It will load all the functions, and it will validate it against the types that we have in there. So if we pass something in that's wrong, we actually get an error directly, and we're not passing a type that's sort of correct or could be correct through all the way and getting like an opaque error. So we use a great library for it called Pydantic, which I can also recommend you check out. That helps with the validation. And yeah, if you're interested in that, it's implemented in a library thing, and I'll also show you a separate project we just launched that lets you use it. But basically, the way it works is we can also pass in functions bottom up. So we can restart at the lowest level, call the function, then pass it in the next function if we have arguments that take something like a schedule or like a generator or a list that's created by a function, and that means we never have the problem that we're passing the same value through, and then if we forget to pass it through one function that we're creating later on, everything falls apart. So yeah, that's implemented in Spacey. Some more details of how it works. I don't want to go in little details. You can check out our little library that's called Confection, because after we launched this in Spacey, people were really interested in it, and we're like, oh, we can pull this out into its own library that you can pip install and use for all of your projects. So if you have a use case where you want to configure something in Python while letting people write code with it and validating it using a cool technology like Pydantic, that's Confection. And that's actually something, when I first did this talk and talked about these topics, that was all stuff in the future. Now it's actually shipped and you can use it, which is often more fun to talk about once it's actually there. So tools like this that help the developer workflow, they also have another function, which is they close the gap that you often have between prototype and production. Ideally, if you build software, you have to try it out as quickly as possible and as often as possible to make sure it works. It doesn't work so well to have someone develop hacky things in Jupyter notebooks and then pass them on to someone who does it properly. Ideally, you want the code you write to run and to test it. And by having these flexible and reproducible tools and workflows that let you easily share your configuration with your colleagues, run it, fix it, improve it, run it again, we can actually get to better results faster, and there are tons of cool features in Python that can help us do that. And another problem, often, especially if we're doing NLP, you want to do a real thing, you want to find something out, and you want to ideally do something that's very, very specific to, say, what your company does. If you only want to find verbs in news text, cool, you can download something off the internet, that's fine. But often the most valuable things are things that are really, really specific to your business. And that often, these business requirements don't usually map to things you can predict end-to-end directly, or you can Google for a model that does exactly that on your data. So to give you a quick example, this is actually what a lot of real-world use cases in natural language processing look like. You have some text that comes in, maybe even text really specific that's only internal to what you're doing, and you want to map that to something structural that you can compute with, that you can put in your database. So here, let's say you want to detect company sales, you want to find out who the buyer and the target was, you want to map it to entries in your knowledge base, like or Wikidata or some source that's like unique where you can say, hey, that is the Microsoft. Like that one company, not some other company. And you want to find out the stock ticker and the price that it was sold for, ideally with a currency as an integer you can do math with. And then, of course, in research, a lot of cool, interesting ideas are trying to predict that end-to-end. You have this large language model that literally outputs JSON. That's fun, that's super exciting, but it's a lot less useful in real life because you want to have control over all these parts. You don't want to retrain all your model if you forgot one bit of it. There are lots of things you can solve differently that don't even need machine learning. And so in a real world scenario, how you could solve this, for instance, would be this. You start with your text, and you first, another real world problem, you have a lot of company sale announcement, whatever you want to analyze, but a lot of it is also noise because, I don't know, your scraper has a bug, the internet is, I don't know, has terrible input data formats and whatever. So you first want to find out whether something is even about the company sale. And that's something you could, for instance, predict with a text classifier. So you can say, hey, is this about a company sale? Everything that's not about a company sale goes out. Everything that is about company sale, you use. And next, we want to actually find out, hey, who are the parties mentioned in it. So we can detect Microsoft as a company. We can detect GitHub as a company using something that's called an entity recognition, where we look at the words and stands of text and decide whether they represent some type of concept. And so, okay, we have the alias, and now what we also want to do is we want to map that into a real-world object. Like we want to know, hey, that's the GitHub. And it's a bit less, here it's a bit more clear, but if you have something like Google, everything lowercase, you want to know, is it a verb Google? Is it a company Google? Is it, maybe does someone talk about a search engine? There are lots of different levels of it, and so we can use entity linking, which means, hey, we take this name entity here, GitHub, this alias, and predict what node in our knowledge base is it most likely, and then we can have that set. Then we want the stock ticker. I mean, there's the database of stock tickers. There's no need to predict that with machine learning. You literally just look that up in, I don't know, some resource that gives you stock tickers if you have the company name. So that's something you look up. And finally, currency again. You can detect the amount, but you also want to transform it into something you can do maths with. Like don't want 7.5 billion. You want this integer so you can compute things. And that's something, I'm sure there are Python libraries that exist that you can install that can actually do this quite well because it's a relatively small task. And similarly, the currency, you can probably guess based on, hey, I have these two entities, they're both based in the US, so it's probably US dollars and not some other dollars. So these are a lot of steps that you might decide to perform, and that's something, that's ultimately the task of being an NLP developer and the type of work you're doing, but it means, hey, there's not one model that will magically do all these steps. You kind of have to put things together in a pipeline, mix machine learning with more traditional rule-based approaches, and in the end, create this sort of representation that you can work with. And so, so I think that's the main other takeaway I would say is, hey, we are working with reality, or if you're working in applied NLP, you're working with something that's real, and that often does not fall neatly into an end-to-end prediction problem. And so you want to have a composable toolkit of different components that you can put together to solve your problem. If you want to change something, you don't want to retrain your entire pipeline. You want to understand what works. If something goes wrong, you want to go in and see, hey, how can I improve that component? And that's also an important aspect of the developer productivity. And finally, in theory, we have everything we read about when we look into machine learning and cool NLP things. A lot of it talks about code and algorithms, and there's not so much exciting news about the data, but in reality or in practice, it's often the other way around. The code is kind of, there are only so many algorithms, but what you really care about is the data. If you have a problem, you change your data. The way you work with your data is incredibly important. And so you want to have ways to use that data and annotate that data, label that data, prepare that data for machine learning, and also iterate on it if things go wrong. Because just like with programming, the first idea you have for how to write a function is often not the best one. You expect to iterate on your code, and so in a real-world scenario, you also want to be iterating on your data. And so, actually, do we have? Am I over time? Can I do anyway? I'll I have one more pop quiz that's actually kind of cool. So, if you, let's say, you have these two interpretations, you want to create a model and train something that predicts names in text. And so, you're looking at this example. How do you train your model? So can we? Okay. So who would do, like, who thinks, okay, the first, just like a show of hands, like first version. It's like the Pope Francis. Is Francis the person or is Pope Francis the person? Francis? No? Pope Francis the person? Yeah. I think that is like a the guideline, but I think the takeaway here is, well, of course it depends because the one important thing is it needs to be consistent. So even if we had one or two people here who said Francis, if you just assigned a whole group like this the task of working on that data, you would have ended up with data that's inconsistent, and your model would be really confused because it would try to figure out why Francis in this case is the person, and in some other context, Pope Francis is the person, and that can really make an impact. So, thinking about these things is important. And finally, this is my favorite. Are these two statements similar or not similar? Who thinks they're similar? Similar? Okay, not similar? No? Okay, most people think they, yeah, so again, this is, of course these were both trick questions because the answer is always it depends. But also it really depends on your application. Like, out of all of the things you could possibly say in the English language, this is extremely similar. Like these both express sentiment about cats. That's like an incredibly similar thing to say in English. But if you're working on sentiment analysis, that's insanely specific. There's no definition of what's similar. And you ultimately need to get into your data and see, hey, what decision do we have internally of is that similar or not? There's no universal definition of similarity. There's not even necessarily universal definition of a person. That's like something you have to think about. And so that's why you can't get around engaging with your data. And here, that's a quick example of how we thought, hey, that's how we wanted to work. So we built Prodigy, our annotation tool, in sort of, as like a tool, developer tool that really lets you iterate fast on these different approaches. So you can, set up your task very easily in a Python function, load in your data and say, hey, let's go through it. And you might go through your cat, or like, I don't know, things people said on the dating platform, on your dating platform, and annotate it, and then quickly realize, okay, we need a completely different definition here, or we constantly have titles with person names. How do we do that? And you can start again, try again. You can automate things. So that's why overall having a programmatic, ideally, also Python-based way of interacting with your data is an incredibly important part of doing NLP. And here's some examples. So if you're interested, there's a website, you can check it out. But that's the goal here is we want to move fast and we want to train things. You want to train as many models as possible, as often as possible. You want to try things out, see what works. If things don't work, you want to move on. So that's kind of, to me, that's also one of the predictions for how will the future look like and what will people keep doing. Ideally, train more things. There'll be lots of developers, there will be generalists and specialists, but there'll be lots of people working at different companies on NLP. And component pipelines, I think, still have a really important part in the ecosystem because you want to have control over the different parts that you're training. Transfer learning has proven to be an incredibly important tool because it means you can jumpstart your process with knowledge about the world. And finally, people will be, there'll be a lot of iteration. I think there needs to be iteration because the data is in the focus and you need to try things, you need to go back, try again, just like you need to do with code. That's just the life of being a programmer. And I also think with the Python open source ecosystem, people are able to do these things in-house. We're not going to be buying our AI from the AI store. There'll be people skilling into NLP and into machine learning, learning new skills, and are working on these things on very specific use cases in-house. So that's my vision for the future of NLP, and especially in Python.
Great, excellent. Sorry, I should have offered you some water.
Oh, no, it's fine, it's fine.
Maybe someone
No, it's cool, it's cool. I'm just... Yeah.
So if anyone has any questions, I think we still have some time, so please raise your hand.
Yeah, sorry, I went over time a bit, but we can also talk later if,
We can do one or two.
Yep.
Sorry, have questions, okay? Please, go ahead.
Hi. I have been a data scientist working in NLP for like probably over 4 years now, and I started to code as a data scientist.
Yeah.
So I'm writing data scientist code, and I would really like to write more sophisticated code and, you know, just be able to to write source code for something of my own, and even just digging into like your NumPy example was like making me sweat and like.
I mean, no, wait, I feel like I'm not super good at NumPy either. Yeah.
So I've done things like train transformer models, fine tune them, other cool stuff, but then I still I'm struggling with like the, setup function and main.py and under init, under all that stuff. And I've been looking really hard for months on like Python for developers.
Yeah.
And I can't find anything. Do you, what was your educational background, or what did you do to learn how to write source code?
I'm sorry. Yes, yeah. So basically, in a nutshell, the question was, data scientists writing data science code. How can someone get better at writing real source code, library code, proper, really understand how also the Python setup, Python projects work, and what my background is. I mean, so my background's a bit kind of non-standard. I don't have a computer science background either. I'm just sort of, I don't know, got into programming, and I started working on Spacey. That was one of my first real Python projects, and I do think I started writing tests for the whole library, or refactoring the tests. That was one of the first things I did when I started working on Spacey, and I kind of just got into that via, seeing how it's set up, and also I was working on a project that was very well planned from the beginning, because it's like, Matt spent the first months thinking about the data structures, how things are set up. So I think that was my introduction. Is this a good question? Because I do think this is something that isn't taught enough, and that I think is very important, because it's also something we see. Hey, we talk to people who have a cool background, and then we're like, we do need someone who can deliver and build a thing.
Mostly self-taught.
Yeah, and I think that's great. I think that's also that is a skill that's really useful. I probably need to get back to you on that. I want to think about what are good resources, but it's that I agree that it's and I think it's an important skill. I think it's a good sort of drive that. Yeah, if you can write, you want to write efficient code. Otherwise, there can be someone else who can write good code, and they can learn how to do some basic data science and take over that niche. And I think I think writing good code, also writing code for other people to use and iterating on it is important, and I'll think about resources.
It sounds like we need a workshop for PyLadies for this. So if anyone is sat there thinking, I actually know a little bit how to do that, maybe we can run a workshop together.
I can get you started with a list of questions that I have.
Yeah. A list of questions is a good starting point.
Yeah. No, I think maybe Matt might have some ideas on it. We talk about this stuff a lot.
I'm happy to talk in the break.
Oh. Yeah.
I don't think there's one side that's all answered.
No, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you have another question?
Maybe?
Yeah.
I wanted maybe to comment something on this. Maybe what you got to use Python as a book is a nice book that is a bit more advanced Python topics. But I want to ask, I'm not counting with data science.
Yeah.
I'm interested to know who's actually annotating the data. They always have these ideas about this expert people.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question, because again, sorry. Yeah, even I suggested that I would be repeating the question, but I didn't do it. And the question is, who's annotating all this data? Which I think is an awesome question, because we're still trying to tell people hey, you need to care about this shit. Because back in the day, some people still believe that you can just throw this over the wall and put it on Amazon Mechanical Turk or one of these click worker platforms and have anyone do it. And I think even the examples I showed today, which are absolutely basic, what's a person? If I asked you all, hey, do you know can you define a person? You'd be like, well, yeah. Or what's similar? Well, I can do that. That's hard, and it needs a really close connection to what you're doing. And that's why I think it's we will look back at trying to outsource data creation, the way we look back at trying to outsource programming in the 90s. I think that's like, that did not work. And you want to have people who know about the domain, and you want to have people who are really connected to the developer as well. That's why, we built an annotation tool, and we thought it was very important to build it as a developer tool first, because the developer is building the model. You need to care about what you're predicting there and what categories you're coming up with. All of that matters. You can't just leave that up to someone you pay $5 an hour on Mechanical Turk. That's like, it's not surprising that this doesn't work well. So often, I think we see more and more in-housing of like the annotation process, which I think is great. It's often people working on the teams. It's often also experts in the field, in which case I think, it's also important to build tools that are really efficient. Like you can have, if you want to have a medical professional giving you the really important information that you don't have, you don't want them to have to click through some annoying UIs. You want them to be as efficient as possible. And so I think that's an important question. There are also really dystopian stories of people outsourcing this click work to, I don't know, people in prison in like certain countries and stuff. Like there is a lot of, this whole outsourcing can go like really wrong, and again, also with transfer learning, we can do a lot of things that mean we don't need big data anymore. I believe that's kind of a myth. Like you don't need millions of examples. You can have a small data set, but it needs to be good. That's a problem. And then you can maybe compensate for a shitty data set by making it bigger. But like, if you can have data that's super relevant and good, you don't need millions of examples, and then it's very, very viable to create it in-house, and it will save you a lot of time and effort.
Time for one last question. No?
It's fine. I mean, I'm still going to be around later, and
Exactly.
just talking to you.
Okay, so thank you, Ian. adding you to screen. Now you're there. You can just go to your live.
Hi everyone, please take your seats again, and we'll begin our second section, second part of our members talk evening. And before I start introducing our second speaker, Noah here, I know everyone's slightly hungry. Don't worry, the pizza's coming. We have meat, vegetarian, vegan, and also gluten-free salad coming. So you have that to look forward to. But right now, let's introduce our second speaker, Noah. And she has been active in OSS for many years now, and she co-founded Our Ladies Berlin, volunteered in PyData Berlin, and founded Set Art Day Berlin, and also Vim LDS Berlin, and she volunteered in Use R Toulouse. And she was also speaker at PyCon D and PyData Berlin in 2019. She co-maintains the Use R knowledge base and co-chaired PyCon Deutschland and PyData Berlin 2022 this year. Besides that, she also went from being a data scientist to a director of data science at respectable companies, and later became a freelance consultant. Noah has a BSc in physics and a master in economics and business science, and an MIS in economics. And here's a talk. And today she'll be talking about how to lead contributor experience. And yeah, let's welcome Noah again.
So I thought I'd ask first, since it's also about contributor experience, but also since it's the month of October, I thought I'd ask if anyone has ever contributed to an open source project before. Yeah. And maybe is anyone a maintainer of an open source project out of you all folks? Yeah, all right. Is anyone thinking about contributing this month? Maybe getting started, or in the future, not this month, let's not make it time sensitive. All right, so this might be interesting, particularly for you. And if not, I do think there's some transferable topics for other communities, or also for management of folks in general. But it is very open source focused, so let's put it that way. So it's very nice to be scheduled for October. So yeah, hi, I'm Mel. And you already heard a lot about me. So you already know that I'm active in Python and R, that I've been both coding and managing for some years now. And I've been, most recently in my current job at Quantsite, I'm active and working and contributing to Pandas and Matplotlib. So that's my fun now, and where I'm working. Yeah, and that's two of my favorite conferences, but that's not what I'm doing right now. I do like talking about my community activity a lot, because it's how I got started in open source. And there are many, many ways to get started in open source. And it doesn't necessarily involve code contribution. And I think that's kind of important to highlight. And I like saying that. And I think it was really important for me. Like, open source was a really important community space for me. That's why I've been doing so much, but I'm still involved in it, and maybe why I work in it now. So I thought maybe I'd just talk a little bit about it. I have this crazy slide that I did for an ANA recently. So it gets even crazier than what you've heard before. I do a bunch of stuff. And the reason I did all of this is specifically this nice orange corner that you heard so much about, and why I put it first and say that I did this while I did all the other stuff, it was really, really important for me to do that. The open source community, for me, and community organization, and finding those spaces was a way for me to take a step away from the workspaces that I was in and get connected with people and talk about difficulties I was facing at workspaces sometimes, or connecting to like-minded people, or just because I was often underrepresented in the places I was working at, finding communities like this one for people who are underrepresented in the workspaces I often worked at, and finding mentorship, finding other people to connect with. And luckily for me, since I speak English, since I have management experience, and for other resources and reasons that I'm privileged, often in the spaces that I arrive to, I very often was able to assume leadership positions as well, which is not the case for everybody. So I got a lot of benefits out of this very early on, which I didn't get at work always early on. So I think those spaces gave me a lot, and I am very grateful for what open source gave me alongside my career. It has been one of the most stable things in my career development, and it has been amazing. And some of the longest term relationships, longest term like connections that I've had and mentorships that I've had in my career, and it's been really, really great for me. So that's in a way how I have the job I have right now, and thanks to that in a small way. So what I wanted to talk to you about today is my current job, which is contributor experience. And we got a really nice grant, so I'll tell you a little bit about the scope of that grant. And then I'll tell you about what that actually means, like what we're actually doing with that, and maybe what can you do. And if you've seen this talk before, like, it's been updated since we've been doing a lot more. So you may have seen this in PyData, or your sci-fi, since I keep talking about my work. So this part doesn't change very much. We did get a grant from the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, and the grant is titled Advancing an Inclusive Culture in the Scientific Python Ecosystem. And it's led by the wonderful Melissa, and it's a 2-year grant, part of their essential open source software DEI grant cycle. And it is a joint grant for 4 projects, NumPy, SciPy, Matplotlib, and Pandas. You may have heard of 1 or 2 of them. And the primary goal of the grant is to support onboarding, inclusion, and retention of people from historically marginalized groups on the Scientific Python project, and structurally improve the community dynamics of these 4 projects. So yeah, quite a goal, not necessarily an easy target, but a very important one, and one that really motivated me to do a bit of a career change, really. Not exactly what I've been doing before. Like I said, not in my main career, kind of what I was doing volunteering. I went and changed what I did from what I do in the evening on the side to what I do now full time, which was very motivating and exciting on a personal level. We ended up creating 3 contributor experience lead positions. We wanted to diversify contribution paths. We want to identify, document, and implement practices that foster inclusivity. And we want to be engaging, onboarding, and supporting new contributors, especially those from historically underrepresented groups. And to promote retention and leadership progression for a current member of those projects. We don't yet know how we're going to do all of those things when we got the grant. We just decided that those were the things that we wanted to do. And one of the important things that I often get asked about, I don't know if this will happen in this space, but it often happens that I get asked about, like, wait, but why do we need to do this? So it was very briefly addressed in the proposal, because the call was for a DEI grant cycle. So it wasn't necessarily critical to answer the why do we need a DEI project. So it was addressed by saying that hiring maintainers from diverse backgrounds would address this problem only temporarily. It's not a long-term solution. It also takes real effort to diversify contribution paths inside these projects and build spaces where diverse newcomers can thrive. The grant focuses on creating a DEI action plan and implementing practices to foster inclusivity and culture change, and would lead to long-term changes. That was our idea. We don't want something temporary. And I can say that on a personal level, I would rather not discuss why we need inclusive and diverse to be inclusive and diverse. Like I told you, this was the reason I got into open source. I need these spaces. I need this kind of work. I need this work to happen in general. I'm glad that we have them in meetups and conferences, and I think it's time for us to have them in the projects if the projects don't have them already. So these 4 projects decided to do it, and I'm very grateful that they did this. Yeah, I don't think it's a good idea to interrogate that if it's not, if it's in general not clear. So, what does that actually mean? We have a wonderful team. I'm not by myself. So Inessa is working with NumPy. Melissa, our lead, is working across all 4 projects, which is amazing. And I myself am working with Matplotlib and Pandas. And that's us. And yeah, I thought I would tell you a little bit about where we're taking our projects from to what it is we're currently doing. So far, our projects, before we got started, they had either community leads, triage leads, or no one really that was dedicated. Either all of the maintainers in some way were doing community, or no one in some way felt like they were doing community. They was just done. And community was just a very broad term in the project. In general, a lot of folks that start contributing and consider joining do this for many reasons in projects, and I guess in a lot of open source. Some people think that our projects are cool, and they'd like to come and do something. Some people would like to get some technical knowledge. They'd like to learn something. They'd like to have someone check their code and get a review and learn something out of it. Some people are learning in university and are really doing their education, and it's to like get their research done, getting something somewhere ahead academically. Some people are coming for a sense of community. They want to get connected with folks. They like the way open source communities work. And some people, yeah, they just, they're just coming for their own personal development or for many other reasons, for their work, their own personal reasons, and we can't really tell. Like, it's really hard to tell why someone is coming to open source, and there isn't one reason why, and there isn't for us to judge the reasons. So they're all great. Maybe some of them will become regular contributors. Maybe some of them will become maintainers. A lot of them won't. As contributor experience lead, when we join the project, we own a part of this community work, not all of it. We started trying to think about community as there's all sorts of parts of the community. We want to focus on the contributor community and potential contributors as different from people who are using our projects and are not going to become contributors to the project. So we're not quite DevRel or developer relationship. We're not here to promote the project, and we're not quite developer experience engineers, because we're not here to try to make sure that people enjoy using the code or the library either. We try to create kind of a dedicated function, which maybe is unique to the open source ecosystem, I don't know, but we're trying to come up with something that is about how do we make sure that people want to join us behind and do what we do, which is sometimes crazy because a lot of us are volunteers. There's very few jobs doing what we're doing, but potentially there'll be more. That's what we're trying to do to develop this field as well. And take ownership, responsibility for a little bit of what we do, review something, triage something, start by contributing tests, and then later do something else, documentation, fix some bug, triage, review, whatever you feel that you find interesting, And as you enjoy this, potentially you do more. But we are trying to think about how we support this part of the project, which is how do you support contributors. And we're not only supporting new contributors, like we said, we also support contributors who are already in the project, which means people who are already doing triage, people who are already maintainers, and thinking about what is it they need and how can we make their work easier as well. So we're trying to come up with actions to do that, and we're also trying to come up with actions to make these projects more diverse while we're doing that as well. So that's the challenge in that, not just to be doing this and making everything nice and friendly, but also making it more inclusive, in general, welcoming to people who maybe historically have not been welcomed and didn't see themselves fitting in there. And if they join, they might be the first one. And how can we support that onboarding process? So we're trying to create possibilities there. So what are our areas of work? How can we do this? So onboarding. That means welcoming new contributors, creating learning paths for roles and working groups, whether it's triage, docs, maintainers, integrating useful tools, Gitpod, if you know what that is, web environment where everything is already set up and you don't need to know how to install the dev environment on your computer and set it up. You can start working in the browser and first work in the PR and later figure out how to configure your development environment. But also surveys, sign-up forms, docs extensions, whatever is required. Outreach, we do sprints. We try to figure out ways to credit contributors, especially non-code contributors, presentations, and all sorts of other things. And we also help with governance, whether it's clarifying, documenting roles and responsibility, pathways, and reaching them within the project. A lot of this doesn't exist within projects, even though what has been clarified has only been clarified for a very specific set of roles, which is what has already existed so far and usually focused on code. And facilitating also open conversation about participatory leadership models and things like that. So I mentioned that not all maintenance work requires coding skill. One of that, for example, is my work. My work, I do also contribute to our projects, which is fun, and I really enjoy it. But it's not all of my work. I organize meetings, I do coaching, mentoring, I do all sorts of things, and I teach. And so together in our team, we try to come up with all of the skills that you might do as you are a contributor experience lead. And we came up with a list. So here are some things you might be doing as a contributor experience lead, and they're not all engineering skills. So if you're interested in that, I think also what's interesting is that I came to this from being a conference organizer on the side and a meetup organizer on the side. A lot of this is transferable skills that came from that, from being a manager and community organizer. And when a lot of folks, when I presented this at Euro Sci-Fi, a lot of project maintainers told me, where do I find these people? This sounds great. I want this in the project. And I was like, who here organized a conference? These are your people. Like, there's a lot of people who are interested, who are already in our community, who have these skills, who care about it, and who are available. And we just haven't opened our project doors to opening issues for this in our project, potentially. So I think there's a lot of things that are available and that we could be calling for them. The issue, though, is that they're not always going to get you those green squares. They do get you the Pythonistas, though. So you kind of need to think about how you're going to be, thinking about how you're going to be crediting things in your project, and thinking about how you're going to be, how you're going to be thinking about how work looks like, and how people would come in, and how you're going to be crediting them, and how what is valuable and tangible. And that's a lot, when it comes to our work, a lot of what people think is like, what is this? How do I know that you're doing it? Like, because it's not a commit. And I understand that. I understand that it doesn't fit our usual framework, and that is it's a shift, it's a hard change. It's not something that's going to be coming in easy. But I do think that when you see the work, you do realize it, and that's what is coming up also with a lot of our listening sessions with maintainers, and a lot of what's happening in the work we do in the project is that it gets valued really, really fast. So I thought I'd show you a couple of examples of the type of things that we do. One thing we do is meeting templates. It sounds super easy. All of you who may be working in industry are like, sure, we do this all the time. Open source projects, not all the time. So here's a meeting template that I did from that Matplotlib. Again, this is not necessarily groundbreaking technology here, but it is what I started calling social infrastructure rather than code infrastructure for a project. So what we do is for the new contributors meeting, but we do it for other meetings as well. We started doing a meetup meeting template in HackMD. In this case, we make sure we flag a code of conduct, just like we're done today. We make sure that we clarify things that are important to clarify for new contributors, and we show examples. So this is the template before it was used by anyone. So we give examples of how someone could add themselves to the template. Me and another maintainer already added ourselves in there. But we also say that it's completely optional because we will archive these notes. And so if you put your name in there, this will go into GitHub. So you might not want to put your name in there. Then we put pronouns to be welcoming. We give example for people how to use it, so people know how to use the agenda if they haven't done it before. So it's pretty long and detailed. It's not an empty page. We also put useful resources at the bottom, so folks who are joining for the first time can find all sorts of notes and things about the project, and all of the communication channels for the project as well. So all sorts of information that's useful there. Some examples from those meetings, what gets up being discussed in new contributor meetings, because it's also kind of nice to have new contributors join for a meeting and see what they ask and what do new contributors want to know about a project when they join. So all sorts of folks want to know about etiquette, what it's like to talk about a PR, what should you expect the maintainer to say or do, how you should participate, what are the unwritten rules, and who was at the time a relatively new contributor. Oops. Yeah, another example for later on is how do you pick a first issue. That's a pretty common one. It's documented in our documentation, so it's pretty easy for us to link to it and explain it. But of course, not everybody reads the documentation. That's pretty common. So it's very nice to repeat, and also there's often follow-up questions. And if people want to know how would they pick it for themselves, or they would tell you what's easy for them or what's hard for them, and you can kind of help them navigate. You could also go and open the issues right now and help them choose something for themselves. So that's a pretty common topic as well. Another thing that I really like using, if you're not using it in your project, is saved replies. So I think saved replies can really help reduce bias and get you to move faster in replying to people. GitHub, if you are using it like us, with a lot of people who are writing on your project. So I try to write relatively a lot. Sometimes we write it in the documentation and link to it, but I do like to give people a lot of examples and understanding, and also phrase the replies in a way that doesn't assume their level as much as possible. So if I want to make sure that they know they can do it themselves, but if they don't want to do it themselves, I'm happy to help them and support them and do it for them. And yeah, basically, that's always the thing that we can't, that's hard to do with async communication on GitHub, that we don't really know the person we're talking to, what their level is, what their level of interest is, what their level of patience is. And so we're constantly trying to find what's the right answer. And also, it could be that we have already answered 100 of these today. So a saved reply really helps us make sure that we're always answering consistently in the project. So that's that. And then I thought maybe, how would this be relevant to you? You're not doing my job. So what might still be interesting? So I did prepare a few ideas and a maybe exciting announcement. So first of all, if you are considering ways to contribute and open in ways for underrepresented people to become contributors, you can write your own welcoming, helpful replies. You can upload this issue on GitHub. That would be very useful. That it's about making saved replies shared for the whole project rather than for individual people, so that we don't have to individually save them for each person, and we could have, if I save it, everybody in the project has it. That would be very nice. You can make your own meeting templates. You can copy mine. You can start or join one of our new contributors meeting. Pandas is tomorrow. You can stop fearing and start loving your code of conduct and announce it in different meetings. And you can consider actions to promote access for disabled and or diverse contributors, which would also be really nice. So that's all sorts of things that you can do. Other than that, we do have our own website now and our own project. So it's a new open source community dedicated to our work. And our goal is to have a space to talk about all of this and to open this up for projects beyond the 4 projects we are working on. So we are starting to document everything that we do in a project agnostic way and actually in a Python agnostic way. So this is available to any open source project. And we started to welcoming more people to start contributing. We're having our own community calls, and you're all welcome to contribute, participate. If you want to talk about your specific project and how we can help you there, then please join our calls. If you want to give examples of how things are implemented in your project, then please send a PR, and we'd be happy to hear from you. That's it.
So thank you, Noah, for such an amazing and just a very heartwarming discussion, presentation as well. So now we have a little bit of time for some Q&As. Any questions? Yeah, go.
So I'm also a data scientist, and I'd be kind of curious about getting involved in open source. Is it possible to get involved and just contribute to, say, docs, no code?
Yeah.
Okay.
Could you, for the benefit of people at home, repeat the question?
Yes. So is it possible to start contributing if you're not a coder, if you're a data scientist who doesn't code very much? Can you start contributing by just contributing in docs? And yes, there are doc teams in a lot of the projects. You can even, so sometimes there's a dedicated docs meeting, but sometimes not. But you can definitely be a contributor who focuses in a specific area, whether there's a working group or not. And you can be contributing just to docs.
Thank you.
That'd be great. There's also web developers who only do web. There's designers who only do design. So there's definitely people who specialize. Yeah.
I don't know much about open source, so this may sound a bit naive, but where does the money from the grant go to in your project? Because I always thought that contributors were contributing on like a volunteer basis. Is it things that go to like advocacy, sending people to conferences, or paying salaries for the people who are leading this specific project, or like?
So I'm pretty sure we have, like, everything is open online. I don't know the full breakdown because I'm not the PI in the grant, or I haven't looked recently, but it is for our salaries.
Mm-hmm.
I think we had a consultant for a while. There might be some travel in there, but there's like a breakdown of it. I think the majority is for our salaries in this one, but every grant can be different. Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's very interesting. As an next organizer, I wish I could go through all this. And I think it was do you actually have this replies? Do you find them as templates for people to use them as replies, or is it automated?
So the question is are saved replies saved and you can use them in like manually, or are they automated by bots? So in this case, the saved replies I showed in the examples are to be used manually. There are also bots in GitHub that you can use to generate automatic replies. And some of our projects use them in specific cases. So you can create, I think we have like a, I think Matplotlib has one when your first merges for a new contributor, you have something like nice on your first merge or something like this. So there are a few ones that are automated, a few actions that help create those, but every project needs to define them for themselves. Yeah.
I must know because my experience in that project with the whole reply.
Yeah.
Very unpleasant.
It can happen,
I
yeah.
think it's really determined to keep contributing.
Yeah.
The impression of I found.
Yeah.
It's practical, but
Yeah.
it depends, I guess, on the method.
Yeah, I agree that the bots are a bit hard, I would say. I think they can be an important tool for a maintainer because they are like dealing with a lot of content, but they do need to be worded and timed in a way that is respectful for the contributors so that the experience is positive. I agree. Or at least not negative. Let's say at least income neutral. I agree. But the save replies we are working on are manual just so that, again, when the maintainer uses a reply, they don't write it out of like what comes up to my mind now, and then every contributor gets a different experience depending on how tired the maintainer is or what they understood from the moment, but more like, wait, I have a reply that was well crafted for the situation, and because there's a consistent experience throughout. That's the idea. And it also helps reduce bias because it removes all the assumptions that you're not conscious of at the moment of we can't tell. Yeah.
It's like education in a way.
Or you don't. That's the thing we're skipping. That there are things we can't educate away from, and we recognize that there are things that with unconscious bias there are things that we can overcome, no matter how much we'd like. Like it will take a long time to rewire ourselves. So having a save reply helps us to be consistent, and that's just really important to reduce bias overall. I wish we had them in life, honestly, as people. Yeah. You had a question?
I don't know, it's learning by example, not to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering, like, so it sounds like these communities, or I think like the 4 or 5 years, like, do they exist mostly online? Just as a background, I did participate like in a hackathon for open source, and like I had a really great experience, and I wanted to continue it, but like I was kind of too afraid to do it on my own, and it would have been nice to like work with a different person, like because we were like split up in pairs, so I don't know how to move on, and if there's like opportunities to like meet in person or to find a coding partner online, or what would you say?
Yeah. So just to repeat the question, are these communities online to continue to collaborate with other people, or are they in physical spaces? For our project, at least the new contributor meetings that we organize, they are online. And most of our projects have them monthly. NumPy has them bi-weekly, I believe, or fortnightly. And the rest of the projects have them monthly at the moment. And that means that once a month you can come to this meeting. There are other people who are coming to meet each other, some maintainers, some contributors who have been in the project for a long time who are coming as well, and they're all there to see what folks want to talk about, how can we help you, how can we support you. We can do breakout rooms. Sometimes there are talks that are organized, walk through the PR, how did I debug this, sometimes the maintainers or the contributors try to show something and it doesn't work, and that's great because we all like see how things don't work together. Sometimes there are showcases from within the community, so there's and a lot of time it's unscripted, and it's just like, let's just see where things go and what questions come up. And the whole idea is just to have regular time to not talk about where the project is going, but like how are people who are working on it, who are new and figuring stuff out, are doing. From there, if people want to team up or organize, we can probably help support with that, but people are coming from all over the world to the project, so it's not necessarily something that might be easy to do. It depends. We do have Slacks or Gitter for all of the projects, and those are spaces where people can stay in touch in between the meetings and also like coordinate how they organize themselves. So I don't know if that helps, but for on-site, I know there's some locations where maintainers are more active. I was just talking about maybe starting something for Pandas here since I'm here. So there might be something coming up, but it very much depends on where folks are, which for us, unfortunately, is less inclusive because a lot of our maintainers are in very specific areas in the world, and we're trying to be inclusive to all areas of work.
So another big round of applause. Sorry, just so everyone online can also see this cuteness. Pizza is currently coming up the stairs, so hold tight. Thank you so much, Noah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Both of you, really insightful talks, and I think lots of great points there. Small reminder, on Thursday we have the open source contributors hack evening, so that's a great space if you're just hearing about open source and you want to know more. Also, thanks for giving all the shout out about being a community organizer, because we're also always looking for more folks to get involved. And what was the third thing? I know what it was. Big thank you, Fan, because you weren't here at the start. I was saying how awesome it is that you did such a great job organizing the meetup. So thank you so much. Big round of applause. All right, and with that, we'll sign off online, and the folks in the room can, get to know each other a bit more. If you have questions, can talk to us. Pizza is coming up the stairs, so don't run away just yet. She was jumping on the ground. So.